Good evening. Welcome to the second lesson of Outsmarting Antisemitism, where we learn the Jewish response, the response of Torah to anti-Semitism. And really not just a response, but really actionable and perspective on what we are to respond to those who wish us hate. So tonight we're going to begin with noting three things about anti-Semitism, and three important things that really will set the tone for tonight's class and for the really understanding the why of anti-Semitism. There's three important points to understand about anti-Semitism, which will give us understanding, in the depth of it. First point is, it's ancient. It's been around for thousands of years. It isn't a result of anything that came along since X, Y, or Z, as some people have tried to claim that it's a response to Christianity's response to its creation, and so they decided to hate the Jews, or various other episodes of Jewish history. We've been hated from day one. It's thousands of years, as we will address presently. Second point is that the claims against the Jews have always been outlandish, have always been absurd. And thirdly, they've always been contradictory. We're going to do an interesting, we're going to test something that we haven't done in the past. We've done it a little bit, but we'll try it again. So we're going to look at text 1 on page 48, text 1 and text 2. We're going to take a few minutes, 2-3 minutes, and if everyone will read through text 1 and text 2, and following that, if you have a pen handy, on page 52, write in the box the anti-Semitic tropes that you glean from text 1 and text 2. And just to give you an overview, text 1 is from a Roman writer whose name was Tacitus. He lived in the 1st century. This predates Christianity, and he's writing slander against the Jews. And text 2 is from Josephus Flavius, from his publication of Against Apion, which was a polemical, really a response to anti-Semitic claims in his time, also the 1st century, responding to various anti-Semitic tropes that occurred in his lifetime. And so if you can go through text 1 and text 2, and then on page 52, write certain motifs or tropes that you come across. So if you can, post 1-word or 2-word answers in the chat box of different ideas that you've come up with.
Rabbi, my chat is disabled.
Oh, whoops, I'm not sure how that, I don't
Mine too.
even know how to do that. Okay, I guess I'm not sure how to undisable it, but I guess we'll, I'm sorry. All right, I guess that'll go for the questions as well. You can text me or just keep it for the end of the class. Sorry about that. I don't know how to undisable it, able it. So the ideas that we came up with, I'm sure that going through it, it's pretty obvious. They're pretty open. It's quite clear of what the anti-Semitic tropes are, and they're exactly the ones that we hear today. Nothing has changed 2,000 years later. They are still the same anti-Semitic tropes that we hear thousands of years later, blaming Jews for various sorts of things, whether the Jews were even in the area or had anything to do with it. And I'm just going to run through some of them. The societal problems, the plague in Tacitus is blamed on the Jewish people, the fact that Jewish people are lazy, the fact that the Jews are rejected by the gods, the fact that we have opposing values, the fact that Jews are wealthy, the fact that they rip off the non-Jews, the idea that we hate non-Jews, and the idea of cruel rituals, which really was the precursor or perhaps the foundation of the infamous blood libel of the medieval times and later up until the final literal blood libel of Menachem Beilis in 1911. So these aren't new anti-Semitic tropes. These aren't new anti-Semitic ideas. These have been around for thousands of years. They predate Christianity. They predate Israel. They predate Islam. They predate really everything. And so we can't really say that the cause for anti-Semitism is X, Y, or Z, the various reasons that people have given throughout the year. You know, they say the story of the two Jewish people, Isaac and Yankel, were walking down the street and they see a big sign outside of the church and it said, "Come and convert and get $100. And so Yankel turns to Isaac and he says, "Look, Isaac, I can really use the money. I'll go do it. You know, it won't be for real. I'll play along. I'll go do it." And so Yankel's waiting and Isaac goes inside and he comes out about an hour later. And Yankel says, "No, Isaac, how was?" He says, "Oh, it was fantastic. It's amazing." So Yankel says to Isaac, "No, did you get the $100? Isaac says, "You Jews, it's all about the money." These anti-Semitic tropes were always around, they were always there, and they were absurd in those days, those ideas, and they're absurd nowadays. Just to show you an anti-Semitic trope that started surrounding us in recent years, in recent memory, one that's, I think, believed by quite a large percentage of people. There are 10% of people, if I'm not mistaken, by a study that was done, that believe that the Jews were involved in doing anti-Semitism. Just Google it, and you'll see that the terrorist government of Israel cannot be ruled out as a suspect. It's not just a fringe group of a few percent of points, whatever percent. There's a pretty large percentage, not large, actually, you know, close to majority, God forbid, but a somewhat, you know, substantial percentage or something so absurd. These claims have been absurd for thousands of years. This absurd nature has also proven to us to be contradictory. Not just absurd, not just ancient, but really contradictory. There was a great sage, Rabbi Menachem Zemba, who was killed in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, a great rabbi. And here's a short clip which will tell us a little bit about his background and text 4, which highlights this contradictory aspect.
On the
east bank of the Vistula River in the Warsaw suburb of Praga, a Jewish boy was born in 1883 and named Menachem, he who brings comfort. His father, Elazar Zemba, died shortly after, and the boy was raised by his grandfather. He became rapidly known as a dazzling genius and formidable Torah scholar, corresponding with the best Torah minds of his era. Menachem Zemba married at age 18. His wealthy father-in-law supported him for 20 years while he studied and put pen to paper, authoring over 10,000 pages of original Torah insights, including commentaries on Maimonides' magnum opus and on the Jerusalem Talmud, and 4 volumes of halachic responsa. His fame spread globally. He was offered rabbinical positions, including the office of the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, but he humbly shunned leadership. Leadership was thrust upon him in 1935 by order of the Grand Rabbi of Ger. The humble rabbi joined the Warsaw Rabbinate and proved his worth, becoming a world authority on Jewish law and a foremost spokesman for Polish Jewry. Before reaching age 40, Rabbi Zemba was appointed honorary secretary to Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah, the Council of Great Torah Sages, populated by sages twice his age. In 1937, he twice addressed the full assemblage and was treated with awe. Then the Nazis arrived. Jewish Warsaw was reduced to a ghetto. 460,000 people were imprisoned in just 1.3 square miles. Starvation, disease, deportation, murder. Despite repeated offers of escape, Rabbi Zemba refused to abandon his flock. To them, he was a rare pillar of comfort. As one of a handful of rabbis who survived in the ghetto until its final days, he rallied his desperate brethren with powerful messages of hope and determination. He recorded an insight into the nature of anti-Semitism before the war. In light of his subsequent experiences under Nazi depravity, his words ring with timeless poignancy. There are those who seek to identify legitimate causes for the hatred of Jews. However, reality has shown that there is no legitimate reason. Anti-Semitism has no justifiable cause. The haters simply choose to hate God's people. This is demonstrated by the fact that Jews are hated for being capitalists and also for being socialists. They are hated because they are overly ambitious and sharp-minded, and also because they are indolent and parasitic. They are hated because they are too religious and conservative, and also because they advance progressive and secular ideas. The reasons for this hatred are consistently contradictory and have not an ounce of logic behind them. Shortly before Passover, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising erupted. Amid furious fighting and flames, Rabbi Zemba calmly conducted a Passover Seder as if nothing was amiss. But on the 5th day of Passover, April 24th, 1943, Rabbi Zemba was gunned down by Nazi bullets. The community he shepherded with love and sacrifice came together at terrible risk to bury their beloved rabbi in a temporary grave. His family was deported to Treblinka. None survived. His lifetime of copious writings rose to heaven in the Warsaw fires. Hardly any of it survived. In 1958, his body was exhumed. Tens of thousands of people amassed, including an array of leading Jewish sages, to lay the heroic rabbi to eternal rest in dignity. Reality has proven that this righteous man was right. There is no legitimate reason for the hatred leveled in each generation against the innocent men, women, and children of the Jewish people.
In every single generation, The anti-Semites, the evil people, chose various concerns, various issues that will most inflame the population of the time in order to blame it on the Jews and then get the people, incite the masses against the Jewish people. It didn't have to make sense. It was absolutely absurd, but it was done because of Jew hatred. It had nothing to do with anything logical. It was entirely illogical, which would lead to a very simple idea. And the idea is, if we'd like to counter anti-Semitism, let's explain it to them. Let's explain if these ideas are so absurd, if the ideas that they were believing in and the tropes that they were believing in, and the stories that they were being told were so absurd, then what does it take? Let's just put the facts out there. Let them understand what the reality is, that we're not wealthy, that we don't control the world, that we're not killing people for blood and for matzah. Let's tell them the absurdity of what's going on. And this way people will believe it. And as a matter of fact, that's what Josephus Flavius attempted to do with his book Against the Apian. To explain to the masses that all the anti-Semitic tropes are just that. They're tropes, they're nonsensical, and they're not true. But the reality is, Against Apian did almost nothing to help. Its effectiveness was very, very limited, as we see from the past 2,000 years of Jew hatred. Granted, it is important to put it out there, to let people know, to put the facts out here, but the reality is that people who are hardcore haters, they will not be confused with the facts. They're evil people, and confusing them with the facts won't do anything. And it's hit home by Devorah Lipstadt, the professor we quoted last lesson, on text 5. Bob, can you read for us text 5 on page 56?
It is hard, if not impossible, to explain something that is essentially irrational, delusional, and absurd. That is the nature of all conspiracy theories, of which anti-Semitism is just one. Think about it. Why do some people insist that the moon landings took place on a stage set someplace in the American West? Despite the existence of reams of scientific and personal evidence to the contrary, they believe this because they subscribe to the notion that the government and other powerful entities are engaged in vast conspiracies to fool the public. If we were to provide these conspiracy theorists with evidence that proves the landing was indeed on the moon, they would a priori dismiss what we say and assume we are part of the conspiracy. To try to defeat an irrational supposition, especially when it is firmly held by its proponents, with a rational explanation is virtually impossible. Any information that does not correspond with the conspiracy theorists' preferred social, political, or ethnic narratives is ipso facto false. Social scientists have described such theories as having a self-sealing quality. That makes them particularly immune to challenge.
Thank you. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't put the facts out there. That just means that we got to make sure that there are evil people out there, and putting out the facts will not, for the most part of that section of people, change their minds. Which leads us to a second point, and that is the name anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism and anti-Semite, where do these terms come from? These terms are relatively a newer terms that were created by the anti-Semites themselves to really turn it into a respectable theory. It's not just Jew hatred, it's not evil, it's not wrong, it's a theory. The theory is anti-Semitism, just like there's anti-separatists and the anti-monarchists and there's anti-nationalists, they're all respectable theories. So too, anti-Semitism was a theory created by the anti-Semites to make it sound more respectable. And like we see in text 6, Dr. Herman, can you read for us text 6, please, on page 57?
Text 6, what's in a name? Mar Wilhelm, 1818 to 1904, German writer, political theorist, and agitator. In 1879, Mar founded the Antisemites League, the first organization devoted exclusively to promoting political anti-Semitism. Mar's organization reflected his secular racism, which existed inconsistently alongside his religious anti-Semitism. His self-proclaimed goal was to free Christianity from the yoke of Judaism. Mar coined the term antisemitism, which for him denoted a secular racial hatred of Jews. He used the word anti-Semitism to make Jew hatred seem rational, sanctioned by science, polite.
Thank you. So given the absurdity of anti-Semitism, and not to speak of the tremendous suffering we Jewish people have endured throughout the ages, it should be obvious that we shouldn't give it this respectable term. We shouldn't dignify this ludicrousness with referring to it by an idea. There's a much better way of how to refer to it, and that is what it was referred to by Jews for thousands of years. There's an interesting memoir or biography, which was written by a woman whose name was Gluckel of Hamelin. She was a Jewish businesswoman in Germany in the mid-17th century, and she wrote various goings-on of her city. I believe she lived in Hamburg. And with regard to one specific story, was a story where in short, a non-Jewish resident of Hamburg was sentenced to death by the local authorities for murdering 2 Jews. And because of how many anti-Semites there were in Hamburg, they weren't allowed, they couldn't allow for one of them to lose his life over nothing. Over killing 2 Jews, why should he lose his life? And therefore, on the day of his sentencing and execution, there was tremendous anti-Semitic agitation of the masses against the Jewish people. And with that background, she writes as follows in text 7. This is in translation from the original Yiddish. Rachel, can you read for us, please, text 7 on page 58?
Sure. Call it what it is. On the day the murderer was sentenced to death, there was a commotion in Hamburg that had not been seen there for 100 years over any man sentenced to death. The lives of all Jews were in danger due to the extreme vicious evil wickedness that had been roused.
Thank you. Call it what it is. It's evil wickedness. That's what we ought to call it, because that's what it is. Let's not dignify it by calling it something, namely anti-Semitism, which is supposed to give it a dignified idea that it's a theory that makes sense. Now, thankfully, in that specific story, nothing happened. The Jewish people, it ended off well for the Jewish people at that point. But really, we ought to refer to it by its true name. It's wicked, it's evil. I'm going to continue referring to it as anti-Semitism because that's what we know it as, but it's a point to ponder whenever we discuss these ideas. Which leads us to really the most important point of tonight's topic, and that is, so why? Why is it that there's this seemingly irrational, ancient hatred for the Jewish people that has no basis in anything, in any logic, in any reason? That there's nothing? The Jewish people were blamed for everything throughout history, for every idea throughout history. And there have been tons of explanations that were given by sages throughout the age, by historians throughout the ages of why the Jews, but all of them don't add up. As all these reasons are put so eloquently by the late Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of the UK and the Commonwealth, whose first yahrzeit was actually last week. And he writes as follows in text 8. Leah, can you please read for us text 8 on page 60?
There has been an almost endless set of speculations about what the cause of anti-Semitism actually is. Some have seen it in psychological terms. displaced fear, externalization of inner conflict, projected guilt, and the creation of a scapegoat. Others have given it a social political explanation. Jews were a group who could conveniently be blamed for economic resentments, social unrest, class conflict, or destabilizing change. Yet others view it through the premise of culture and identity. Jews were the stereotyped outsiders against whom a group could define itself. Yet others noting the concentration of anti-Semitism among the very faiths, Christianity and Islam, that trace their descent to Abraham and Judaism, favoring a Freudian explanation in terms of the myth of I forget how to say his name. Anyway, we seek to kill those who give us birth. It would be strange indeed if so complex the phenomenon did not give rise to multiple explanations.
Thank you. And so these are various explanations, they're various ideas, which, knowing what we now know about the history of anti-Semitism, none of these reasons resonated with me. And I'm not sure how you feel about these various reasons or all of them together. But in the spirit of this course, which is the Torah's view, that's what we're going to present here, an interesting idea as presented by the Rebbe in continuation with our discussion of the story of Purim. And from analyzing another aspect of the story of Purim, we're going to get a very interesting approach on the cause of anti-Semitism, the way the Torah sees it. And it's not to say that perhaps these other four reasons that were mentioned by Rabbi Sachs aren't part of it. Could be it's been added by them. But this is a very, very powerful reason presented by the Torah, which really seems to hit the nail on the head and hit the core issue. What happens in the story of Esther? In the book of Esther, there's Haman. Haman is the advisor to King Ahasuerus. He's the advisor to the leader of the Persian Empire. The Jewish people are subjects of the Persian Empire. And he marries Esther, who becomes the queen. Esther is Mordechai's first cousin, Mordechai being the leader of the Jewish people at the time. And Esther is told by Mordechai to hide her Jewishness. And we know the end of the story. But what happens? When does Haman devise this plan to annihilate the Jewish people? He comes to, in the 3rd chapter, he comes to Ahasuerus, and he tells Ahasuerus that you have this nation, they're scattered throughout your land, they have different customs, they stick out, it's not worth it for the king to keep these people. I will give you 10,000 cubes of silver in place of the taxes that the Jewish people pay you, and in return, give me permission to annihilate the Jewish people, and that's it, they'll be extinct, there won't be any more Jews, you'll have no more problems. And what does the king answer? No problem. Not only you can take the Jews, keep your silver. I don't need your silver. You're getting rid of a problem for me. You're doing me a favor. That's what happens. That's the story. On this story, the Talmud tells us an interesting metaphor that gives us very deep insight to this story. What's the metaphor? The metaphor is in text 9. Betsy, can you please read for us text 9 on page 61? Betsy, can you please read for us on page 61, text 9?
Sorry.
No,
Anti-Semites in parable. We can use a parable to gain insight into the respective positions of Ahasuerus and Haman. They are similar to two individuals, one of whom has a tall mound in his field, whereas the other has a ditch in his field. The owner of the ditch mused to himself, I wish I could buy the tall mound to fill up my ditch. The owner of the mound said to himself, I wish I could purchase the right to dump my mound into his empty ditch. Not long afterward, the two met. The owner of the ditch said, sell me your mound. The owner of the mound said, take it for free. You'll do me a favor.
Thank you. So what's going on here? It's an interesting parable. That's what he says. Take the Jews, you're doing me a favor. Take the Jews, get rid of them. But what's really going on in this story? You see, a parable that the Talmud gives is not like a parable that someone just decides to make up. It's a precise parable that has to do with the details of the topic we're discussing. So what does this parable and how does the exact story fit into this parable? And really, what insight does the parable give us that the Talmud has to add this parable? It's pretty simple, their conversation. Haman says, I want to kill the Jews. Achashverosh says, go ahead, you're doing me a favor. What insight does the parable give us? And the second question really to understand this parable is not only what insight does this parable give us, but how does it fit with the story? In other words, yes, there's a mound, and the mound seems to be the Jewish people. They are the problem. Anybody who has a field wants to get rid of a random mound in the middle of their field. Well, how does Haman's ditch, the second half of the parable, a ditch, where do we see a ditch in the story? What's Haman missing that he needs this mound of Jews to fill that ditch? But it's precisely that. You see, when it comes to anti-Semitism, there's 2 points. There's 2 dimensions to an anti-Semite. One dimension of anti-Semitism is the superficial Achashverosh dimension, which is he sees the Jews as a mound. They're just a problem. There's a presence in his midst that's unwanted, and get rid of it, right? That's Achashverosh's mound, and Haman says, I can get rid of your mound for you. That would be comparable to just plain old racism and xenophobia. You just hate someone for no reason because you feel that they're a nuisance. They're them, their type, their people, their race, they're just there, they're bothersome, get rid of them, right? Get rid of the dirt from the field. Now, if this was the sum total of anti-Semitism, it would be quite depressing because there's not much for us to do that would leave us with no choice other than we're hated, we're a mound, we're there to be hated, and people have to get rid of this mound, and there's nothing we can do about it. But then there's a second point to anti-Semitism that the Talmud is teaching us with this parable. The second point to anti-Semitism is there's a ditch. Haman has a ditch. What's Haman's ditch? He has a void. He's missing a deeper dimension of life. It's the deeper reason for anti-Semitism. You see, the Talmud calls Achashverosh a foolish king. Why? Because as a fool, he didn't understand the true nature of this hate of the Jewish people. But Haman wasn't a fool. Haman knew why he hated the Jews. Why he hated the Jews? Because he had this ditch. He had this void. Haman had everything he wanted. He had all the conventional gifts of a great life. Life was amazing for him. He had a wife, he had children, he had a family, he had riches, he was the second to the king. Not only that, Achashverosh had made a decree that anyone who sees Haman has to bow down before him. He was the most powerful person, second to the king at his time. He had everything he could have wanted. But you know what he didn't have? He didn't have depth to his life. He didn't have a purpose. He didn't have meaning to his life. He had a ditch, he had a void, and you know how he decided to fill that void? What highlighted that void? What triggered his noticing of having that void? When Mordechai refused to bow down to him. Following Achashverosh's decree that everyone has to bow to Haman, Mordechai, the Jew, said, we don't bow. We only bow to God. We're Jews, we're proud Jews, and I'm going to remain standing even while the king says that we have to bow because I'm a Jew and a Jew doesn't bow. But you know what triggered Haman? Was the fact that Mordechai, the Jew, had a purpose in his life. He had depth to his life. He had meaning to his life, meaning such that he was willing to go and sacrifice his life for that meaning. Such depth Haman never knew of, such depth, such meaning, such purpose in his life, Haman was missing. It was a void. His life was all superficial. All the blessings that he had were superficial. He had this void, and that void triggered him. Every time he saw Mordechai at the gate of the palace who refused to bow with him, it triggered his ditch, it triggered his void, it triggered his emptiness, that he's without purpose. And you know what he decided? I'm going to get rid of that trigger. And if I get rid of that trigger, I won't have that feeling of emptiness. In the words in the book of Esther, we have this exact text. That's what the verses tell us in text 10. Brigitte, can you please read for us in text 10 if you have the book handy on page 63. You'll have to unmute first.
Here you go. Haman told them about his magnificent wealth and his many sons, and how the king had promoted him and advanced him above the other officials and royal courtiers. What is more, said Haman, Queen Esther personally prepared a feast, and besides the king, she did not invite anyone but me. And tomorrow, too, I am invited by her, along with the king. But all this means nothing to me each time I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the palace gate.
Thank you. It all means nothing to me when I see Mordecai the Jew, because I see Mordecai the Jew has purpose, he has meaning, he has a goal, he's willing to go to do the ultimate sacrifice. This realization reminded Haman of a deep void that he felt in his own life. Most of the day consisted of what? Of him obsessing over his selfish materialism. Materialism, it may feel good temporarily, but it doesn't have a long-lasting effect, and ultimately it will make people feel entirely empty. And so the Torah teaches us, as a Jew and all people, that God creates each person with a mission in life. God creates each person unique. God creates each person with a unique purpose and a unique mission that we are put here on this earth to fulfill. And that's a message that we know, and it's ingrained in our soul, and we think about it, and the more we think about it, the more we understand that we have a purpose to make the world a better place, be it through the 613 commandments as a Jew, or through the 7 Noahide laws as a non-Jew. But each one of us, every human being, has a mission in this life. Haman was missing that message, and when he saw that Mordecai had that message, this caused Haman to say, you know what? I'm going to get rid of the Jews. I'm going to get rid of the trigger. The problem with getting rid of the trigger is you don't get rid of the issue. There was a better option which Haman could have done. There was a better option which would have solved Haman's issue. And that was, he feels empty. Go ahead and fill that void with meaning, with purpose. Mordecai, he has meaning and purpose. You feel that void. Take that feeling of void and do something with it. Find a purpose in your life. Find a purpose with which to fulfill your life, a positive purpose, something optimistic, something beneficial for the world. Being second to the king, he could have started a revolution of keeping people healthy. Make it his mission in life to feed the poor. Make it his mission. But no. How did he vent his anger of feeling this void? By going ahead and saying, you know what? I'm going to destroy the trigger, but the void's still going to stay there. He's still going to feel like, even if, God forbid, he would have succeeded in getting rid of the Jews, what he didn't know was that he's still going to have that void. He's still going to have that emptiness of not having any purpose in life. And so the Jewish people reminded him of his directionless life, of his life that lacked purpose, and his eyes of his life that lacked meaning. And so the Talmudic passage of giving us this metaphor of the ditch and the mound is not just a nice parable, but it's something powerful that enables us to understand. It gives us insight into the Hamans of each generation. Mm-hmm. And this idea has some very, very important implications. First one being that we see from here one explanation for the persistence of anti-Semitism. And the truth is that perhaps more important than any of the explanations per se is the orientation of the explanation. What I mean by that is any reason for anti-Semitism that turns inwards in a certain way, that itself is anti-Semitism. In other words, if there's a reason for anti-Semitism that blames the Jews, if there's an explanation that blames the Jews for anti-Semitism, that itself is anti-Semitism, because that itself is problematic, it's wrong. We have to have a reason that takes the reason for anti-Semitism and turns it outwards. Let's not internalize the hate, right? Take, for example, a bully. When a bully bullies someone in the schoolyard, two kids in the yard, is bullying the other. Do we say it's the bullied kid's fault that he's being bullied? Of course not. Of course not. We say it's the bully. The bully has some sort of psychological issue that has to be dealt with. The victim is never the case of bullying. The starting point of the problem is the bully himself. It may be a result, and very oftenly so, of the bully's lack of self-esteem. He feels threatened, he feels insecure, and therefore he finds esteem by demonstrating that he's stronger, that he's bigger, that he's more powerful than others, and by making others miserable. If a bullied child starts contemplating, how am I going to change myself to appease the bully? That's wrong. That's pursuing an endless task that will never bear any fruit, because the fault is not with the bullied kid, the fault is with the bully. And a similar concept applies to the Jewish people. It's absolutely of utmost importance to remember that Jew hatred is in the hater. It's not in the hated. You cannot ever blame the hate. It has nothing to do with our choices, and we should never internalize it. Once again, from Rabbi Sachs in text 11. Rick, if you're there, I can't see with the video, but if you'd like to read text 11.
I don't have the book close to me. Sorry.
All right. Alec, would you like to read text 11 on page 64?
Jew must fight anti-Semitism, but never internalize it. That is easier said than done. If you are hated, it is natural to believe you are hateful. That defect lies in you. It yours does. Hate exists in the mind of hater, not in the person of the hated. Jews have faults, and Judaism is a religion of self-criticism and repentance. But those faults have nothing to do with those of which they are accused by their enemies. Anti-Semitism tells us about anti-Semitism, not Jews. One of the mistakes made by good, honorable, and reflective Jews was to believe that since Jews were hated because they were different, they should try as far as possible not to be different. So some converted, others assimilated, yet others reformulated Judaism to eliminate as far as possible all that made Jews and Judaism distinctive. When these things failed, as they did not only in 19th century Germany and Australia, but Austria, but also in 15th century Spain, some internalized this failure. Thus was born by tortured psychology known as Jewish self-hated.
Thank you. So what do we see here? We see here this exact idea. We're never supposed to internalize it. If Jews go ahead and they say, you know what, how we're going to combat anti-Semitism, we're going to assimilate, we're going to be like everyone else, we're going to hide our Jewishness, that's exactly a bullied kid trying to appease the bully. That's wrong, it's in the wrong direction, and it's not going to lead anywhere. It's an impossible task because it's heading in the wrong direction, it's coming from the wrong direction, and it's never going to lead anywhere. These attempts were well-meaning, but they were in the wrong direction. And these attempts have been tried time and time again, and they've always failed because, again, it's like trying to get the bullied kid to appease the bully. That's not where it lies. We have to look for a reason for anti-Semitism outward, like the reason with the ditch. There's meaning that is missing. Let's try and focus on that, because that is where the cause of anti-Semitism is, not with the bully people, not by internalizing and saying, we have to change ourselves. And this leads us into a very important and sensitive topic, and something that I've discussed with some of you in the past. And that is the idea of whether Jews should try to reduce their distinctiveness or noticeability. And we're not talking about in times when there's overt danger, right? In times of communist Russia, Jews would hide their Jewishness because if they didn't, they'd be imprisoned in Siberia. In Germany in 1940, Jews would hide their Judaism because if they didn't, they'd be shot dead. We're not talking about at times like that. We're talking about at times like now here in the United States. Yes, there's anti-Semitism. Yes, it's out there. But the question is, how do we respond? Are we supposed to hide our Jewishness? Because if not, we're going to stoke anti-Semitism. We're going to stick out with our distinctive. Maybe we should, is there something in that we should be less noticeable? And text 12 is an interesting story. I'm going to share it outside of the text with a humorous twist. Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky shared the story. I'm going to embellish it a little bit to hit the point home. Actually, I'll just keep it the way it is, without embellishment. When I say it as a joke, I'll embellish it, but now I'll just say it as it is. Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky, for those of you who aren't familiar, he passed away also about a half a year ago. He was a great doctor, psychologist, has helped thousands of people, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people throughout his, I think it was a 70-year career as a psychologist. He wrote over 50 books. He authored over 50 books and countless articles and papers and whatnot. And he was the son of a Hasidic Rebbe. He was an ultra-Orthodox Jew, and when you saw him in the street, he looked exactly like your run-of-the-mill Hasidic Jew. And you had no idea that he was a leading psychologist in his field. Fascinating writings and a fascinating personality. And he told the following story, that he was once traveling on a bus, and he looked like a Hasidic Jew, a long frock and side curls and a hat and a long beard. And someone came over to him and tells him that, I think it's very shameful that you look so different. You stick out like a sore thumb. It's an embarrassment to the Jewish people. You're the cause of anti-Semitism. Why can't you look like everyone else? He gave him a mouthful for why he looks like he did. So Rabbi Twersky turned to this man and he said, I'm sorry, sir, I'm not Jewish, I'm Amish. And this is how I look. This is how we dress. And the man suddenly became apologetic, and he turns to Rabbi Twersky and says, oh, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I think actually that it's beautiful that you're preserving your traditions. What's the point of the story? And this is a story that actually happened to him. This is the idea of us trying to appease those who are around us. If the Amish belong in the United States, then we belong in the United States. Does a Jew belong in the United States? Does a Jew belong in England? Does a Jew belong in Africa? Does a Jew belong in Russia? If the answer is yes to all those questions, especially in the United States, then a Jew belongs in these places as a Jew. As a Jew. And ultimately, that's really the beauty of a place like the United States, which democracy, which later spread to the rest of the world, the idea that everyone is welcome to perform their religion exactly how they'd like to, with being obviously an honorable citizen, following the laws and following the rules, but to proudly have a mezuzah on the outside of our home, to proudly be able to present a menorah, to proudly announce our Judaism to the public by being proud Jews out in the public and not hiding it, wearing a yarmulke in the public, wearing a tzitzis in the public. And if Jews are forced to conceal themselves either by a government law or by behavioral, by other people who say, you know what, we should hide it, then that itself shows that Jews are not tolerated. And if Jews are not tolerated, that's anti-Semitism. And actually, to the contrary, when we express our Judaism in public, whether it's with wearing a Star of David or with wearing a yarmulke or putting up a mezuzah, a menorah, whatever it is, it confirms to us that even not only to us, but even to the anti-Semites, that there's no reason in a free country for us to hide our Jewishness, as if it's something which is against the American way of life. And if anything, when we notice a rise in anti-Semitism, there's reason to be more outward in our Judaism, because that's precisely when the compatibility of being Jewish where we live needs to be underscored for one and all to see. And many Jews have acted this way, and it's heartening. And we'll quote again Barry Weiss, the journalist who we quoted last week in text 13, where she says something very interesting. Text 13. David, welcome. Can you read for us text 13 on page 67?
Sure, thank you. When statements are needed. In the first 3 decades of my life, I never wore a Magen David necklace. It always seemed redundant to me, but since the Pittsburgh attack, I've worn a Jewish star pendant regularly, especially in public venues and in situations where I'm conscious of being one of the only Jews in the room. The show of pride has become important to me. I want people to know that I am unafraid. This is the example led by Mitchell Leschner during his middle school graduation in spring of Vernon Hills, Illinois. Leschner doesn't usually wear a kippah, but the Poway shooting changed things for the 14-year-old. It was important to make a statement that we're still here, and that no matter what happens, we'll still be here, he said.
Thank you. The benefit of proclaiming our Jewishness openly and celebrating our distinctiveness is not only a benefit to us, but it's a benefit to all minorities. Because when we cover up, when we start hiding our Jewishness, we're giving into the idea that a majority is able to taunt any minority into silence. If we don't cover and we maintain our distinctness, we help the world embrace the dignity of difference. And in fact, according to a recent historian, Cecil Roth, who passed away in 1970, I believe, he writes that Jews have served in this important role for many, many centuries to remind other people around them that there is a different way to think and that we have to accept that. In text 14, Leah, can you please read for us text 14 on page 67?
In this fact, perhaps lay the greatest service of the medieval Jew to mankind. It was a period when authority was triumphant in the intellectual sphere, when thought was circumscribed even more than practice, when uniformity had established itself, not as an accident, but as a principle. Throughout European life, had this state of affairs continued unchallenged, progress, scientific as well as philosophical, would have been impossible. The mere fact that the Jew existed and that he preserved the habit of independent thought helped to save the world from this menace. It was possible even for the least original mind to fail, to realize that in the Jewish quarter where there existed a class as intelligent, at least as other men were, who yet did not believe in other men who possessed literature and beliefs and practices which were not like those of the rest of the world, and who refused to pay even lip service to the prevailing ideas. This very fact saved the world from accepting uniformity finally as a natural thing. It stimulated students and thinkers to realize the existence of other spheres to conquer, over and above those which were delineated from the pulpit. And if from time to time, Europe shook off its lethargy and began to re-examine for itself the wells of human thought, the propensity of the Jew was in part responsible.
Thank you. So simply by being proud Jews, we don't only proudly proclaim who we are, by being proud to be different, the Jewish people have always represented all minorities, that there is another way to be. We don't have to be like everyone else. We have to accept everyone for who they are, but we don't have to be like everyone else. It's okay to be different. by refusing to internalize the hate and by being open about our Jewishness, in turn, we're essentially fighting for all of humanity. Which leads us to this idea, second point about celebrating our Jewishness outward. That celebrating our Jewishness outwardly not only helps the rest of humanity, not only is the correct response, but in fact, it actually reduces anti-Semitism. How's that? Let's go back to the story of Esther. What happens? Haman explains to the king that there's the Jewish people who are bad people, right? And he says, they're a big problem. You want to get rid of them. You don't want them. They're a nuisance. You don't want them. Get rid of them, right? Achashverosh understands. And he says, go and annihilate them. What happens? Esther has a meal with Achashverosh. She has a second meal with Achashverosh. And she tells Achashverosh, by the way, Haman wants to kill me because I'm Jewish. So Achashverosh says, okay, deals off, don't annihilate the Jews. I don't understand, Achashverosh. You have a problem. You have this mound that you want to get rid of, right? You understood that the Jewish people were bad people. Okay, save your queen. Say Esther won't be killed, but still annihilate the Jews. Why all of a sudden does he not want to annihilate the Jews? And it's very simple. Because by Esther telling Achashverosh, I'm a Jew, she wasn't just saying, I'm a Jew, save me. She was telling Achashverosh, look at me. You know me, you chose me over thousands of maidens that you interviewed from all 127 countries that you rule. And you liked me best because you like me who I am. You like my ideas in life. You like my characteristics. You like my behavior. You like my attributes. You like me. I'm a good person. I was the best. You chose me. You know why I'm like that? Because I am Jewish. I'm a product of Judaism, of Torah, of mitzvahs. That's what makes me so special. That's what makes me who I am. And so Achashverosh says, you know what? That makes sense. Why should I get rid of the Jewish people if they produce such wonderful people? They produce someone as wonderful as Esther, who is the best from all 127 countries of people that I interviewed, of people that I met. I chose her because she's so special. And you know why she's so special? Because of her heritage. That's why she's so special. Achashverosh agreed. It's not that Esther is good and all the other Jews are bad. As a matter of fact, this idea presents in a very modern way, in an interesting story that took place not a short while ago. There was a Palestinian, an Arab who lived in Israel. He was born in 1946 in Jerusalem, and he was a committed anti-Semite and a senior Fatah operative. And then in 2014, this same man, who was a senior Fatah operative, took a group of his students. He was a professor at Quds University, and he took a trip together with a group of his students to Auschwitz, see the effects of anti-Semitism and how terrible it was. And that did not go down well with the Palestinian Authority, to say the least. And in 2019, he was interviewed. What triggered that change? We see that in text 16. Bob, can you read for us text 16, please, on page 72?
I started going with my father to Hadassah, Ein Kerem, hospital for chemotherapy. And to my shock, I started to observe that the doctors and nurses treated him as a patient. The doctors were very friendly, and the nurses were also. He would bring them fruit, flowers, and chocolate. And I noticed in the hospital that Palestinians are also receiving treatment. That actually awakened me to a great extent to the humanity in the other. And it has also awakened my humanity. This was the starting point.
Thank you. Exactly the same idea of Esther and Achashverosh. In other words, it's because I am a product of my Judaism, that's why I'm as special. And we encounter this idea all the time. When we have coworkers, when we have people we come in contact with, if we hide our Jewishness, you know what they're going to say? This person is a good person despite being Jewish, despite their Jewishness. But if we are open and proud Jews, then people will look at us and they say, you know why they're so special? Because they're Jewish, because of their Jewish heritage. That is why they're so special. And that will make them rethink any anti-Semitic tropes they may have heard or anti-Semitic ideas that they may be contemplating, or even if they're not overtly anti-Semitic, but if they're, again, those who are overtly anti-Semitic, there's not much we can do about them. They're evil people, and it is what it is, but there's those people on the edge, there's the people in the middle ground that they've heard these ideas and they think maybe there's some truth to it. By us showing up as proud Jews and then being good Jews, being good people, people look at us and they say, you know what? The Jewish people are great people. And it's because of their Judaism. Because if we're openly Jewish, people will link our goodness to our identity. And that brings us to the conclusion, and that is as follows. You see, the ditch complex that Haman had, that anti-Semites have, is that they're missing something in life. They're missing meaning. They're missing purpose. It posits that at the essence, it's something positive. In other words, this feeling that humans have, that we have a feeling of emptiness, is a positive idea. We have a feeling of emptiness. Let's do something about it. Haman corrupted that drive. Haman corrupted that drive of emptiness to something evil. But at its core, its essence, it's a good drive, a feeling of emptiness, because that drives us to go do something positive. And that's why this point is a very, very important point. And that is that ultimately, even this drive, this idea of this feeling of emptiness, the drive which is driving anti-Semites to perform these wicked and become wicked people, the essence of the drive is meant to be used in a good way. And therefore, it's important to know that once we have this, because it's redeemable at its source, it will ultimately be defeated. Isaiah says in the verse 17, the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat. And Maimonides says as follows, these words are a metaphor and a parable. The interpretation of the prophecy is that the Jews will dwell at peace together with the wicked Gentiles, who, like a wolf and leopard, had sought to devour them. We're not there yet, but knowing that the evil of anti-Semitism is a corruption of something healthy, that drive to fill the void gives us the confidence that we're going to get there. We're going to get there of that time when there won't be anti-Semitism. We can do our part once again by making sure that we're proud Jews, that people know that we're proud Jews, by letting people know this idea, by helping others fill their void. Letting people know that they have a void and it should be filled, because obviously we don't tell them, hey, you have a void, but to tell them that they have a purpose and a mission in life. And we go ahead and inspire others to let them know this idea, that they have a mission in life, not only by us being proud Jews, and that encourages others to recognize that the Jewish people are great people and it's because of our Jewish heritage. That's why we're good, and that encourages the reduction of anti-Semitism. Take it a step further, when in previous generations it wasn't possible, here in the United States, it's not only possible, but it's encouraged to go ahead and inspire others, not only Jews, but especially non-Jews, that each one has a purpose in life. And there's a meaningful purpose on why God put a person on this world, and that is to make the world a better place by fulfilling the 7 no-hide laws. And the more we teach that and inspire others, others become inspired and start filling that void. Once they fill their ditch, they don't need the Jews to fill the ditch. And on the contrary, they start respecting the Jews. And so that's our mission that we have, to encourage others to be better people, other people. Concluded with the lesson summary.
Lesson 2. No apologies. 1. The absurd and contradictory claims of anti-Semites have persisted for millennia. Attempting to refute these conspiracy theories may keep some people away from anti-Semitism, but it has proven to be a futile endeavor against hardcore haters. 2. The term anti-Semitism sounds more like a theory and fails to convey that this phenomenon is actually evil wickedness. 3. Much has been said about the root cause of anti-Semitism. One approach sees it resulting from an inner void due to the lack of a true sense of purpose in life. The Jew represents a commitment to living for a higher purpose and dedication to the mission given to humanity by the world's creator. Anti-Semites wish to obliterate their inner emptiness that they are reminded of when encountering the Jew. 4. Hatred exists in the mind of the hater, not the hated. We must avoid internalizing anti-Semitism and imagining that changing elements of our Jewish heritage will solve anti-Semitism. 5. Jews and other minorities cannot be expected to be bifurcated people, severing themselves from their identities in the public sphere. For a minority to have rights in a given place means that it can have a public presence. Being open about our Jewish identity benefits Jews and other minorities. 6. For some potential haters, the best antidote against stumbling into anti-Semitic views is knowing Jews who are upright and of noble character, and noticing that this goodness is linked to their Jewish identity, upbringing, and way of life. To have this influence, we must be open about our Jewish identity. 7. A Jewish explanation for anti-Semitism must allow for the possibility of change, because the Jewish prophets insisted in God's name that anti-Semitism will eventually cease altogether. 8. We can reduce anti-Semitism by teaching the world to avoid an inner void, by embracing God's mission for all humanity.